Well, good evening, folks. We're glad that you have joined us, even though you might not be here in person. We do believe that God is a God who is everywhere, and He calls us to worship everywhere. And so, even if we're not here together physically, spiritually, we're all here together. And so, we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a little different than it was last week, but we have hopes and prayers that in just a few weeks we'll be back the way we were just a week ago. So, just please continue to pray for our folks, our community, this nation, and most importantly, that God is going to be glorified through this. So we're going to spend a little bit of time in worship this evening. We're going to sing a few songs, and then we're going to jump into our lesson for tonight.
Above all powers, above all kings, above all nature and all created things, above all wisdom and all the ways of man,
All right, thank you again for joining us in worship and in song. So what we're continuing on from last week is this tiny little book, The Jordan River Rules by Robert Morgan. He wrote the Red Sea Rules about 20 years ago and absolutely loved this. I loved it, and this has not disappointed me either. So I really do love it. I hope you remember a little bit what we talked about last week. We looked at rule number 1, which God means for you to move forward. And if you'll remember, Moses had died, the Israelites have wandered, and Joshua is now charged with leading all the people across the Jordan. And as we looked at last week, God leads us in stages, He leads us with steps, and He leads us in person. But the big question is, and the one we want to talk about this evening, is how do we summon the strength to move when there is a river in front of us and the enemy is on the other side? So it's kind of hard to picture the Jordan River here today. We hardly have any water here in Lee County. So I just want to contextualize it a little bit, and I want you to think about some struggles that you have in your life and kind of bring this whole idea of the Jordan River right in front of you. Imagine that you're Joshua, that you're the leader of the people, that the person that you had trusted, who you had leaned on, the one who had mediated, the one who was there to help all of the people is now gone. And now on top of that, there is this expectation that you're going to be the one that really is going to step up and lead. And then on top of all of that, you have a very anxious group of people. I mean, didn't we really kind of just describe what's going on in our life? So many changes, things happen in our life, people who we love, people who we looked up to, people who we saw as pillars of faith have moved on. And now all of a sudden there's this expectation that maybe we should be the ones who help lead. And then you throw in the fact that everyone is really anxious right now. They're anxious about government, they're anxious about illness, they're anxious about mandates, they're anxious about the economy, family, relationships, jobs, on and on and on. And so the question is, how do we even imagine fording that river? How do we say, you want to know what? I'm going to take that next step. Everybody get in line behind me. We're going to cross over. Well, listen to what God tells Joshua. This is one of my most favorite passages. It was one of my mother-in-law's favorite passages. It comes from Joshua chapter 1, verse 9. It says, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." We can be strong and we can move forward because we believe in God. We believe in God, and we believe in His Son, and we believe in His plan, and we believe in His promise. And this is the big rub with people who are atheists, who don't believe in God. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe in His Son, you don't believe in His plan, and you don't believe in His promise, and you think, well, there can't be a future, and there really is nothing to be hopeful for. You know, as Christians, we say, we believe that there is something better than this world. If you don't believe in God, you can't say that. If you don't believe in God, you won't defeat death. And your anxiety-filled life in this chaotic world is the best you will ever get. Now, I know oftentimes we talk about growing up as the good old days. And I'm not saying that everything about getting older is bad, but I can tell you there are some things that I used to do when I was younger and didn't even think about. Things like running around without getting sore or being able to read something that's right in front of me. And so I've, kind of had to go through some of these challenges, and we all have these aches and these pains, and it just seems like as we go on, the way that my life is trending, the way that my body is working, I'm getting older and weaker and more tired than I was 10 years ago, and that's just going to continue to digress. And if I don't believe in God, if I don't believe in His promise or His plan, then all I can think is, man, it's kind of just going downhill. I mean, I'm in my 40s. What, I have 50s, 60s, 70s? I mean, 30 years left maybe? Maybe? If you don't believe in God and His promises, then this can be a pretty miserable existence. I have a saying in my office I put up on my little bulletin board. I'd read it somewhere else. It says, if you are in Christ, the world is as close as you will ever get to hell. If you are not in Christ, this world is as close as you will ever get to heaven. I mean, can you imagine that? That this is the best that we would have for us is right here and right now? I believe in a creator. And I believe that He created not only this physical world, but this spiritual realm that He talks about, that He's planned for, that He's prepared for us, and that He's going to call us to someday. And with that in mind, that gives me hope. I can take that next step because I know that there's something greater coming. So God tells Joshua, don't be afraid. I have this promised land prepared for you. And He not only says this to Joshua, but over 30 times in the Bible, we have this command to not be afraid, including our verse for the week. For those of you who tuned in on Facebook, my wife and I have started this year doing a verse for the week. Last week was Titus chapter 2. And so this week I invited everybody else who wanted to join in on the verse that I had chosen, and that you can read it. Encourage you to read it every day, meditate on it, pray about it, and if you'd like, commit it to memory. And so for this week, the verse that I chose is from Isaiah 41, verse 10, and it says this, "So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." And I just think that's a verse that for me personally, I need to be hearing over and over again. And so I want to encourage you, you can kind of scroll up a few posts, and you should be able to see that link. It's only probably a 2-minute video. And I also encourage people that I'm looking for other people to submit different verses that they would like to be included as the verse for the week. And so I want you to think about that. That's just a shameless plug. But God says, don't be afraid. And the reason why He said that is He says, because I'm with you. Because I'm with you. You see, I think we forget that God is the est. He's the est, the E-S-T. God is the biggest, He is the strongest, and He is the wisest. But sometimes we forget. Mary Washington was a devout Christian who was orphaned as a child and was widowed as a young mother of 5. She displayed immense faith as she raised her son George and his siblings. But there's one thing that you might not know about the mother of our first president. She was afraid of thunderstorms. One night in her old age, her daughter came to check on her in her bedroom during a bad storm. And she found her mother, Mary, on her knees in the middle of the floor praying. It was then that Mary confessed. She says, "Betty, my trust is in God, but sometimes my fears are stronger than my faith." I just think that is such a powerful statement and a reminder to us that we constantly have to be thinking about our faith in light of what's going on in the world. And if we're not careful, we can get those out of place. Okay, so let's do something a little bit different, okay? Which is bigger? Okay, let's ask you a question. Which is bigger, the sun or the moon? Which one's bigger? And I want you to tell me, how do you know this? How do you know this? I mean, how many of you have, walked on the moon? Gracie is, her biography for her class is Neil Armstrong. And so we've been studying a little bit about that. How many of you, like Neil Armstrong, have been on the moon? And by the way, while he was there, I don't recall him having a tape measure. And even if he did measure out the moon, I'm pretty sure he didn't measure out the sun. Which one is bigger? Well, that's a no-brainer, because we have information that has been provided to us from a completely different perspective. We have satellites that are not on this earth, not on this planet, that have allowed us to see a different perspective of the sun and the moon. The fact is, the sun is 400 times wider in diameter than the moon. Okay? And you're like, oh yeah, of course, I knew that. We talked about it a few months ago about how big the sun is. I think you could put almost 64 million moons inside the sun if you tried to fill up. So it's absolutely huge. But from Earth, from where we stand, it really isn't that obvious. Have you thought about that before? I mean, when you stand outside at night and you see the moon and you say, wow, that's a big moon, right? Sometimes you have that big moon. Oh, that's great. But have you ever stepped outside and said, wow, the sun looks 400 times bigger than the moon? But the fact is, they actually seem pretty similar in size. Scientists refer to this as what's called angular size, okay? The sun is vastly larger, but it is also much further away. The sun is actually 93 million miles away, while the moon is only about 240,000 miles away. I say only, that's still a long way, but keeping it all in perspective. So can you do the math there? 93 million divided by 240,000. Okay, you ready for this? Let's get a drum roll here. It is about 400 times further away. The sun is about 400 times further away than the moon. And it's also 400 times larger. I mean, it's just so interesting. It's something I never really thought about, that when you look at the moon, it looks about the same size as the sun as you see them in the sky, right? But it just seems the same size. In fact, let's go one deeper. About every 100 years, this planet experiences what is called a total solar eclipse. 100 years is the average. It can happen more recent or even be further apart. But a solar eclipse is when you have the sun over here and the earth over here, and then right here you have the moon. But when it passes at just the right time, it really covers this up. And to use an example here, I have this book right here. It is obviously much smaller than me, but just imagine it passing like this, and all of a sudden, like you can't see hardly any of me. It's so much smaller than me, but because it is so much closer, it seems like it's really large. And I just think that happens sometimes in our faith. I think sometimes we forget how big God is because we let these little things come between us and God, and we start pulling them in closer. When the solar eclipse takes place, it's not like the moon gets any bigger. It's not like the sun gets any smaller. It's just our perspective. The moon is right there. And sometimes our problems can do that to us, can't it? Can't they just kind of overwhelm us and get right into our face until we just think, oh man, I can't see anything. And we even start to wonder, can God handle this? God, are you big enough? And I just want to remind each one of you that we have to keep perspective. Okay, so just useless trivia. I was watching a documentary the other day and came across this, just really interesting. For those of you who are fans of the Christmas movie, The Elf, starring Will Ferrell, he plays Buddy the Elf. And there's some scenes, especially very early on, where he's a boy growing up, and he's in a classroom with other kids who are supposed to be his age. But it's obvious from the movie that he is like much larger than they are because they're elves. Well, just a little bit of trivia for you. That was not done digitally. There was no CGI, no generated enhancements or anything like that. That was all done just by one camera, and it was simple, really. What they did was they had the camera, and they had Will Ferrell up close, and they had his classmates way at the back of the room, and just the way they placed it, it made him look like he was so much bigger. And if you watch that movie, you'd be like, oh man, either he's huge or they're tiny, or they had to do some kind of computer graphics to fix that. Nope, it was just perspective. In fact, what it's called as in the movie biz is forced perspective, that he is brought to the front and he seems so much bigger. And again, it just makes me think, how many times do we allow our problems come so close to us that they just seem so much bigger? Our problems just seem overwhelming. When we let our problems get closer than God, we can forget how big He is. Okay, so just this week, I ran into the donut store, I know, Breakfast of Champions, to grab some breakfast for my family. And so for whatever reason, I don't go through the drive-thru very often. I like to walk in. So I walk in there, and there's this young lady there, and she just looks frazzled and flustered. And nobody else is in the lobby. It's just me, and there's several cars wrapped around, and you could tell she's just running all over the place and just kind of panicked and overwhelmed. And I said, you know what? I told myself, okay, I'm not going to make myself be in a rush. Okay, I'm just going to be patient. And so I just sat down in a chair. I said, do what you need to do with that drive-through line. I'll be okay. So they kind of worked on that. It was just this young lady and her boss, who I believe is the owner of the store. And so after a minute or two, she came up and she said, okay, I'm ready for your order. And she just looked over at me. I said, it's going to be okay. And she looked at me, and her eyes just started to well up. She says, it's been really tough. This is only my second day on the job. And on top of that, her day starts at 2 a.m. And so while it was somewhat early for me, it was already late in the day for her. I mean, she'd been up since 2 in the morning making donuts and trying to figure all of this out. And I just kept saying, you know what? You're doing great. It's going to be okay. I said, you're going to get through this. I said, in a week or two, you're going to be a pro. You're going to be making donuts at 2 a.m. and hopefully going to bed at 6 p.m. You know, like that's a crazy life. But just to see, there was this sense of being overwhelmed that had come upon her. And she just needed to stop and breathe and step away. And like, how many of us have been in that situation before? And it might not be the biggest thing, but all of a sudden we just get caught up in the moments. It's why, you know, in our relationships with people we love the most, we fight about some of the silliest things. It's because we just we don't step back and we lose perspective. And something that's really small, just, you know, we draw it in or we allow it to be pushed in our face. And all of a sudden we think, oh no, what am I going to do? I think it's important for us to realize that our problems only get bigger when we pull them in closer. You know, the Israelites were in the same predicament. They had let their fear of the Canaanites get so close that soon they perceived that the God who had created the world was smaller than the people who were living in it. Fear is forgetting about how big God is. And that's what the Israelites had done just one generation prior. Listen to this from Numbers chapter 13. This is when the spies have now come back from looking over the land that God was going to give to them. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here's its fruit. But, and this is a big one. It says, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. You see, as they got closer to their opponents, to their enemies, to the problem, all of a sudden it seemed larger than life. And the God who had allowed them to cross the Red Sea, the God who had fed them, the God who had led them by a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud, the God who had spoke to them and called them his own people, this huge God, this God who had just completely annihilated the gods of Egypt in every way, right? All of a sudden, they go in and look and they see their enemy and say, oh man, these guys are too big. They lost sight of how big God is. Now, I'm not asking you to pretend that life is perfect and carefree. In fact, Jesus says, he says, don't worry about tomorrow. You know, tomorrow has enough worries of its own. He says, each day has enough trouble of its own. He acknowledges, like, this is really difficult. As he's comforting his disciples just before he's going to go to the cross, he says, in this world, you will have trouble. You will have suffering. He says, he's not trying to say, look, it's going to be easy. He admits it's going to be difficult, right? When we see our troubles larger than life, it's because we've pulled them in and made them bigger than what they've ought to be. And ultimately, we've made God smaller in our own eyes. I don't want to minimize your pain and your suffering, your anxiety and your grief. But I do want you to maximize your view of God. When we grasp how great God is, our problems are still present, but they are manageable because we can see them in perspective. And so this week, I want to challenge you to do three things. The first thing I want you to do is resign your problems. And I actually don't want to say it like that, but I wanted you to hear it like that the first time. I don't want you to resign your problems. I want you to resign your problems. What I'm saying is, I want Jesus. I want you to give them to Jesus and let him take them. Instead of it being in your own hands, or you writing on, I will take this problem. Instead, you say, God, I want you to take this. Jesus will not only take your problems, he asks for them. He invites you. He says, come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy burdened, and I will give you rest. I will take your grief. I will take your pain. I will take your anxiety. I will take your worries. Trust me. Let me have them. Give them to me. Sign them over to me. And so this week, I want you to imagine doing that. When you have fears, I want you to say, Jesus, I want you to take this fear from me. I want you to carry it. You have offered to take my burden, and I want to give it to you right now. This is yours. And trust that he'll take care of it. The second thing I want you to do is I want you to retreat from your worries. Make sure that you keep God closer than your fears. And this is really hard to do in this environment, in this age of information, where we have anything that we think we would need right in our pocket and in our fingertips. I want you to think about how you can step back from those. And that may mean turning off the TV. It may mean you need to stop scrolling or stop posting. It may mean that you stop discussing. But stop drawing in all that anxiety that the world, the media is trying to fill us with. And instead, step back from it. And when we do, that's when we can say, you want to know what? God is bigger and he can handle this. This world has been through a lot worse. And God has seen us through. And he will again. And the last thing I want to encourage you to do after you resign your fears and retreat from your worries, I want you to refill. Be strengthened by the fact that God is bigger and he is right here beside us. The sun maybe 93 million miles away, but God's Son is right here next to you and me. You see, when it comes to courage, there are only two camps: the in camp and the dis camp. Now, you can go back and forth in either one, but I want to encourage you to pitch your tent in the in camp, the camp that encourages. And it's not easy to do. But by our words, by the things that we talk about, determines if we are people who provide courage to others or we are ones who discourage others. You know, when I was a youth minister years and years ago, we had a silly phrase that I always told the kids. I said, I want you to encourage encouragement and discourage discouragement. I mean, it's funny, but it works that way. You know, if you choose to allow discouragement into your life, if you're always focused on the negative, if you surround yourself by people who are negative, if you choose to let people continue to fill up with negative, that's just going to be soaked into you, and you're going to start letting that out. And so I just want to encourage you to find ways to be the one who provides encouragement. Like I said, you know, you're either going to be the one who encourages people or you're going to be the one who discourages people. There's just really no room in the middle. And the fact is that this community and this world needs encouragement. So many people are living in fear. And fear brings about anxiety. And anxiety robs us of hope. And hope takes away our joy. I mean, doesn't that describe what's going on right now? We have a lot of people who are afraid, who don't have hope, who've lost their joy. And when you have that many people, all of a sudden you're dealing with division and you're dealing with hate. We can be a people who encourage. And the way that we encourage is that we step out and we share Jesus with other people. And so Jordan River rule number 2 is say no to discouragement and say yes to strength. This evening and this week, let's bring God closer. And let's just enjoy how great and awesome and amazing God is. What a great and awesome God. Set aside those anxieties and those fears and just spend time soaking up on how great God is. I want to close us out in prayer, and then we will be done for the evening. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you for being a good and awesome and great and wonderful God, but sometimes we allow our problems to take the forefront, and we lose perspective. We start thinking about issues with government and illness and relationships, and all of a sudden every little thing can just seem so insurmountable. And so God, I just pray that we will give those over to you, that we will step back away from those, and instead we will allow ourselves to be filled with your goodness and your love and your mercy. For all the ones who are listening here tonight, Lord, I pray a special blessing over them. I pray that they will continue to invite you into their life, into their plans, into their joys, into their brokenness. Let them see, let them experience, let them feel and know that you're a God who is loving and powerful and right there with them. Thank you again for your son Jesus and for the fact that he completely changed everything when he chose to come down, to live for us, to die for us, and to prepare a place for us for eternity. Jesus, we thank you for that. It's in your name that I pray. Amen. We just want to thank you again for joining us on Wednesday night. Also, just a reminder, we will be meeting on Sunday we will be meeting just for worship, and that will take place at 10 a.m., not 9 a.m. So we're going to meet at 10 a.m. for worship, and then you'll be dismissed after that. And again, we're just hoping to do that for a few weeks as we still have more and more folks who are coming up ill. And so just please be in prayer for them as well. But thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you all, and God bless.